Yo, what's up, guys? Today we're working on a rust bucket 96 Ford F-150 doing a radius arm. Customer brought it in, he tried doing it himself. He snapped that big nut off right at the end and said it was my problem now. So I've got it supported with a floor jack and a chunk of wood. It looks a little sketchy, but it's solid. I've got my stand over here. What we're going to want to do is get that big nut off. Probably with a vehicle this old, you're going to want some torches heated up first. I had to heat up these two nuts on the shock mount. Here's the shock mount right here. Goes on just like that. Boom. Two nuts down in there and bolts. Now, once you've got that back end off and the shock mount, you're gonna lower your jack and the coil spring is just going to get loose on you. But what you gotta do is take the nut off of this because there's a plate that keeps the coil spring on. I used a long extender from above the coil spring, because the coil spring will come out at you a little bit, with a 1 1/8 socket. It's actually a 28 mil, but I didn't have a deep well 28 mil here. And it started coming off with the impact and then stopped, and I had to use my torch, got it in between the coil springs and just hit that nut, and then the impact took it the rest of the way off. Now this is the worst part of the job. This long bolt that goes from the top of here to down here will not want to come out. All right, next thing I'm going to do is try to pry this perch off of there. I believe there's a nut underneath that perch. Once we get it off, you can see it kind of sits in a slot here and there's a lot of rust. I put some heat and PB Blaster on it. And hopefully with the pry bar, I can get that to pop off. All right, that guy was on there pretty good, but it's loose now. Just pull it straight up. And now we're left with this nut here that's holding the whole bolt in. So that looks pretty nasty. I'm gonna go ahead and clean it up and heat it up and zip it off. All right, I cleaned that up, and on this one, it's welded to the top of the radius arm. On our new one, there is no nut there. So I actually do have to spin this bottom, and it's not budging. I'm gonna try heating again. That sleeve in there. All right, guys, this is pretty crazy. Pretty crazy. I heated up that sleeve inside there, red hot, 3 times, and then hit it with everything I had, breaker bar, air tool. The welds gave on the top of this nut. I finally started working the bottom head of the bolt, left and right. It started moving just a hair. It started moving a little more. Heated it red hot again. Started moving more. Then finally it just broke free. And the weld broke free on the top of the nut too. So I might be able to reuse that nut, but I torched the side of it down pretty good. So I'm gonna put a new nut on it. But it finally came loose. You just got to heat the crap out of that sleeve, heat the top of the nut. If you don't have a nice set of oxyacetylene torches, I don't recommend doing this job if it looks anywhere as near as rusty as this truck. All right, I cleaned her up a little bit. I thought that was a sleeve I was heating, but it was actually the bolt. It looked a little wider there than it did at the tip, but as you can see, there's no sleeve that fell out. It's just the bolt. So I heated the shit out of that bolt, Looks like the main problem was it was seized in the holes, the bolt chemically welded. So it was seized right up in there, that bad. Finally got it out though. Time to put the new arm together. All right, we set our new radius arm on there. Put the bolt through the bottom. And we're gonna get this radius arm lined up with the hole it's gonna go in. Tighten that nut down. And then put our cap back on, our perch. And it's got a little slot on the front side that it goes on. So I'm gonna tighten this down, put the perch on, and then move on to the next step. All right, I decided to put a new nut on that top one because it was kind of messed up. I took my perch back off and put the bigger washer and bigger bushing right here, set it in the hole. I got this jack with the block of wood. It's still down far enough for me to get my coil spring in. So I'm going to tighten down this new nut and then start putting that perch and coil spring on. All right, I got the end, the radius arm in. I tightened it just a little bit on the nut. I could not fit all the bushings and caps together. So I just put the nut on the end and squished them a little bit. And that should give me a little bit of room to get the next washer on the back. But for now, I want to get the coil spring lined up. I don't have that bolt tight. That way I can move around and I can put it into position and raise up in my jack. I'm going to try tightening that nut and seeing if the coil spring fits in where it's supposed to be, but I might have to leave it a little bit loose so that the coil spring fits in its slot, and then finish by hand tightening with a wrench through the coil spring. We'll see what happens. All right, I was able to get the coil spring in the top perch. I had to leave this nut just a little bit loose, a few threads. That way it would push into its perch while I jacked up on the jack. It's kind of hard to do just by myself, but not too bad. So now I'm going to use my 1 1/8 crescent wrench and tighten down that the rest of the way. All right, now as you can see, I got a ratchet strap on my hoist. If you don't have a hoist, you can go further back on the frame somewhere, nice and sturdy. The problem is getting enough thread to put your washer and your cup on and your nut. So I'm using a ratchet strap to pull the radius arm back into that bracket, squish the bushings a little bit to get enough thread to start everything on. All right, I got my shock mount. The bolt's in there, kind of loose. The shock won't come down all the way, so I'm going to jack up a little bit. All right, and now we got plenty of room to get our shock bolt in there. All right, we got our shock mount all tightened down, shock bolt tightened down, good to go. Got our new bushing kit in, biggest washer on the back. I put a little grease on there, helps for the next guy. Bigger bushing towards the front, bigger washer towards the front of the vehicle. And they should mushroom a little bit. Then we got our smaller bushing. This plastic bushing, washer, nut, all tightened down. And the coil spring in its perch. Tightened down that nut. Was able to get in there with a wrench, 1 1/8. That's all tight. Everything's tight. Ready to put the wheel back on, job's done. If you want to take on this project, make sure you have a ratchet strap or something to pull that tight with. Have some torches ready, and be prepared to replace some hardware. I replaced all 3 nuts. They were 3/4, by 10 nuts. Went to the auto parts store down the road and they had a box of them.